Welcome, everyone. It's another week of the Enough to Keep Going podcast here on the E2KG network. This is the week of October 28th. This is October 29th for those of you keeping track at home or viewing along with us. If you found this afterward, don't worry. It's still timely. It's still functional. But here on the E2KG network, every other week, we come at you with a game experience show. This is our playlist. This is our what you've been playing. So that is our show this week. Next week, we will be back with another deep dive episode as we look at the last 2 weeks of news to see what has been going on and what that means for you as a gamer, for us as fans and consumers, and what it means potentially even for a business. You know that it is hard to separate those things sometimes, as the real world has continued to remind us it's fall. So I am DBqHams, and joining me tonight is Agasicles Stamas. Agasicles, how are you tonight? Excellent. And you're rocking your mixer hat. Does that come along with a sweet contract from Microsoft? Well, it's good to support the product placement even though. So excellent, excellent. So I'm glad you're here tonight. It's been a while that you and I have been back on a podcast together. So I have been out and hopping around, and I'm sorry that I missed the podcast last week. I've been traveling quite a bit for work, which means I've also been continuing to play a number of Apple Arcade games. So we'll have some time to get to that in our playlist, but first, we have to look back at what our assignment was. This is, again, every other week we give ourselves an assignment, something that may force us to play something out of our comfort zone or something that we can thematically share and experience. So this past week, last 2 weeks, given that we are heading to the Halloween holiday, that we are looking at horror and Halloween type games. So whether it is a specific horror game or genre, or it is just a Halloween themed game. Although there's not too many of those outside of Costume Quest. But again, we had a number of options here. I chose two VR games, as you can see my PSVR back behind me. Agasicles, what did you choose as your horror themed choice here?
Yeah, so I wound up playing Metro 2033. Interestingly enough, which is probably not made for Halloween, so to speak. It's not made for scares for the sake of scares, but as it turns out, the ambient atmosphere of that game and the post-apocalyptic setting make it equally terrifying, I would say.
Yeah, I could see. So, was it effective in terms of creating that kind of tense atmosphere that would come with a horror?
Yeah, it's very kind of The Walking Dead like in terms of once you set out on this adventure, um, you know, what I want to say, the enemies in your concern on the path are, you're just as worried about encountering humans as you are encountering the monsters, and in some cases more so. In some cases, the combat with the monsters is kind of straightforward, and I hesitate to say expected, but in comparison to even encountering the human AI, which is very very random and eclectic and filled with hilltops of tactical challenge. In particular, this week while I was playing, or last week while I was playing, there was one level where I was exiting. I'd come through a tunnel and then walked up a flight of stairs, and then was trying to get outside of the tunnel entrance. But there were about eight Op 4 outside, and it was kind of deadly funnel of fire kind of thing, because there were some of them to the left and at least a couple of them to the right. They had an uncanny ability to see me in the dark, even when I would douse the light. They, would periodically, throw dynamite, and often, some of the times, because I had to replay this section over and over and over and over again, some of the times where what caused me to have to replay it was they throw a stick of dynamite, and there was some type of explosive barrel in the vicinity of the entrance, and it didn't always go off, but sometimes it did, and it was like no matter where I was on the staircase or on the landing trying to get out of the tunnel entrance, once if that explosion went off, then it was just game over. So yeah, so it was fairly interesting. You know, it creates problems for you. Like anytime you're outside the metro, you have to have a gas mask on, and so the combination of that like claustrophobia that gets caused by you having the gas mask on, in conjunction with very scarce ammunition, a fairly limited range of weapons. All these things combine to just make it to where you are kind of white knuckle going around this place, knowing that you're going to get jumped at some point. So yeah, and then in combination with that, just as far as like pure Halloween kind of frights, then you have just weird monsters out of nowhere that seem to always be different. Like it seems like you never encountered the exact same monster twice. And so, there's always that brief moment of, I don't know if you've ever had that thing where you've actually seen something horrifying, and there's this passage of time in slow motion of this a few seconds as your brain makes the attempt to comprehend that it's actually seeing what you're actually seeing. Like it's kind of like a neural lockup. There were, you get a couple of those moments as you're going around, and you're like, "What in the world is this thing that I'm looking at?" So yeah, it was pretty effective as a Halloween movie, I'd say. Halloween
sounds
game.
like it, yeah, very much so. So this is Metro 2033. This is the first game. This is
Correct.
2010.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So, and how's it look? You're running on PC. Does it have a nice kind of graphical overhaul, or is this the Redux version of this, or?
No, this is the original, and it still holds up well over time. I was playing it on. I was actually playing it on my primary gaming PC with an RTX 2070, and it looked good. So I really couldn't complain with its graphical fidelity.
Well, it's certainly back in the day it was pushing systems when it launched.
Well, 4A Games is a studio that is very much cut in the same kind of cloth as Crytek. They kind of take pride in punishing machines and bringing them to their knees, and they always have a very high mark for what they feel is graphical quality for them, which is a bar that typically exceeds most other development teams. And so yeah, I mean, much in the way that Crysis still looked good 10 years after its debut on PC, this game is very much in the same vein.
So why did you end up going with 2033 versus Last Light or last year's or this year's Exodus, right?
Yeah, well, I guess this is one of those series that I still hold on to the notion of, well, I don't really want to play like the new thing until I at least go through. And since these games are novelized, right, and are based on an actual fictional work, I feel like it's even more dependent to consume that story. And they're not horribly long. I think each game is like maybe 11 to 12 hours of the single-player campaign.
Very consumable.
So, yeah. So I don't think it's an impossible thing to surmount. And I feel like the level of quality of that game, it's worth the time to go back and play it without, skipping steps. Nice.
Very nice. So, well, I went back to a couple, well, not so much older, but a little older, not as old as 2010 for mine. So I picked up, this summer, I picked up the gold edition of Resident Evil 7, which has all the DLC, which includes some Chris Redfield stuff and some more action-y based scenes and scenarios in the Resident Evil 7 engine. And I also picked back up my save from April of 2018. So it's been a year and a half since the last time I played at this.
That you even made it past that point. Because that is one of, for a variety gamer and people like us with huge backlogs, that's one of the most demoralizing things ever, is when you pop that game open and I often try and just get through it and just like pick the save file and load it without really looking at the date. But in the unfortunate instances where you do or you have to, like, the realization and recognition that, like, here's this game that you've paid for, that was available to you, but the game save is like a year or 2 years or something older, is just always like, ooh, hard to shake off.
It was that moment of like, oh. But so here's the reality of that experience was that I knew exactly where I had saved it. I knew the moments leading up to it. I could still, like, once I loaded back in, I remembered, okay, this is in that drawer, and if I open this door, it's going to be this room, or, and when I circled back around to certain areas, I knew where secrets were. And I think that is because I shut it off before because I played it in VR. And I remember talking about this. It was another assignment a while back, a couple years ago. That playing it in 2D on a screen is fine. It feels like a good video game. Putting it on in VR, it's claustrophobic because you're limited in your movement, but everything feels like you're there. And so there's this real sense of place that it created that I don't know if I would have just played it on my TV or my monitor, that I would have that same sense of place. But because I kind of virtually was moving around it and I had an emotional connection to it, it definitely still brought me right back in. So, it still left me with that after playing it for, even playing it for a half hour, I still had that. I had to force myself to keep playing because my natural inclination in VR with it is to get out, right? I don't want to be in this. Why do I need to go further into this mystery? I should just leave and let the police handle this. Why should I have to deal with this, right? So it was, there was this kind of, okay, I have to kind of acknowledge that I'm playing this game and not living this game. But it really is still effective. It just, I even after putting it down, I still had kind of this tension in my stomach for a little while. It really is effective of creating that sense. I'm really curious. I didn't get a chance to play some of the DLC, and the DLC takes place after the story. It's kind of standalone. You can play it. So I'm curious when it moves into a little more of an action-y Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 5 type of setting, if that changes the amount of tension there. Because if it's no longer kind of this creepy, unexpected, you don't know what's coming next, versus, you can see the waves of enemies, and then you end up getting kind of what you're experiencing in terms of, it can still be creepy and unsettling and a little jumpy. It's a different type of feel.
Well, this is one of the weird things of horror, I know for me. So what I like in horror is I don't like watching like slasher films. Like I like watching like things about the supernatural and whatnot, and to a certain extent those things make me a little more jumpy, like when it's like you watch that stuff and then I'm like, okay, I gotta watch an episode of Seinfeld right before I go to sleep. But by the same token, like I also, one of the reasons I don't like watching like slasher films, or like what you're playing Resident Evil 7 is, that's not the supernatural, those are just crazy people, and like those things could happen for real, right? And that's very unsettling. And like when I hit that realization when I was playing Resident Evil 7 myself, and I haven't completed the game. I'm one of those people that I get a few hours into it, and then I wind up putting it aside and I don't get back to it. I'm sure my game save would also be like 2 years old. But that's one of the things that makes it shocking, right? As a chapter in the Resident Evil series, is that like that realization of what's going on makes a thing much in the way of Outlast, right? Like Outlast is largely horrifying in some ways. Because it's not the supernatural for the most part. Right? The most part is it's just you're in an asylum, and contending with that is rough.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. There's something about that grounds it. That then, because there's kind of a real world connection to it, it takes out that kind of fanciful horror aspect of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went from the creepy atmosphere in Resident Evil 7 to jump scares in Five Nights at Freddy's VR experience. So this was it came out this spring, came out in May, and for PSVR, I think it's also now been ported out to other VR platforms as well. Uh, I will say that I have never played a whole lot of Five Nights at Freddy's. I have played the first two on tablets, and I'm the kind of person who, in the second one, when you could put on a mask to disguise yourself, I would be happy to just sit there all night long in the dark with the mask on and try to survive. Right? I don't think I ever got past the first couple nights. I think Thursday was as far as I ever made it. So going back in and the concept and the conceit of this in the VR game is actually pretty fun. It's pretty creative. Is it you're coming into a museum, a Five Nights at Freddy's museum, or kind of amusement park where they've created a virtual theme ride of all these urban legends around Five Nights, the fictional Chuck E. Cheese or Showbiz Pizza or whatever animatronic musical rockabilly explosion type of touch point that you may have. So, a rock of fire explosion. Sorry, I'll get that correct. And so it sets it up as like you can kind of jump in and out between the different games, the different scenarios. They've added some new scenarios as well. And then it throws you into a virtual environment, and it's effective, right? Because the tablet was a relatively flat interface where you were pushing different areas of the tablet to check different monitors, and you had two other buttons that would turn on lights and close doors. It works very well because you don't have to really move around a whole lot, unlike Resident Evil, right? You're pretty much just right there, but it still creates that sense of it's not as much tension because you can kind of know when something's coming. And in fact, I found that playing the VR game, it provided less jump scares than the tablet, because as I remember the tablet, it felt like when they would sneak up on you, the screen would jump and jostle, and you'd see the big claws that they try to eat you or whatever it was. But it would happen suddenly, like you could you see some of that. But here it feels like because you have the ability to turn your head, you can see them coming into the room. And so you have a little bit of awareness that something's coming where you don't necessarily have that kind of flash in your face jump scare. It's a $30 game. It's been on sale for like $20. I think it's actually a pretty fun kind of horror experience. I played with my kids and their friends actually who had played it. It's funny to think about this generation of teenagers who quote unquote grew up on Five Nights at Freddy's. That there's merchandise and can walk through Walmart and find children's underwear with Five Nights at Freddy's on it, right? And so there's something there culturally that affected people, and so it is kind of a fun way to revisit it. Again, not a huge experience, not a deep one like Resident Evil, but again, it provided a quick jump scare, and it was much easier to put down and also easier to remember that it was just a game. So that was just fine by me.
Now, these two games, Resident Evil 7, admittedly a minor player, but arguably a player and contender for Game of the Year in the year it was released. Five Nights at Freddy's, not so much so. How did it feel playing those two in close proximity to each other? We often talk on this show about how, much of the way we do with music or movies or whatever, that we have a wide-ranging appreciation for different levels of games and gameplay. But in this instance, where you're playing it for assignment and it's in close proximity to each other, was there a lack of tolerance or patience for Five Nights in comparison to the fairly well-written horror of Resident Evil 7, or maybe even vice versa, where you felt like Resident Evil 7 maybe took itself too seriously, as opposed to the more lighthearted fun of Five Nights?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually they go together kind of well because of that. Because Resident Evil is this kind of very serious, very atmospheric, kind of full immersion experience in VR. And Five Nights is, by the sheer nature of the fact that it's animatronic animals trying to eat you, there's a campiness to it, and the voiceovers of like the former guards calling or other people calling up, the announcer voiceover that kind of sets it all up. There's a definite kind of tongue in cheek. There's a self awareness in there, and so it works kind of more like a campy horror does.
Yeah, so it's kind of like so they play together kind of like a blockbuster night where you get one horror flick and one comedy, and you watch the horror flick first, so
Yep.
you
Yeah,
get that
right.
out of the way. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It was a palate cleanser still within the assignment. How
Right.
about that?
Right. Yeah. Very,
Yeah.
very good.
All right, so let's move on to actually the things that we've spent more of our time playing over the last couple of weeks. And I guess, Goose, I'm going to let you go first because the other night in our Discord channel, you posted about winning your first Fortnite match, right? That you've jumped back into Fortnite in this most recent season. And I don't know if it was your first one, but you at least acknowledged that you had won and got some kudos along the way among the hosts here. So tell us, was it the new season that brought you in? And why did you choose the platform you chose, and how was your experience?
Yeah, man, that's a lot of different angles on this one. So one of the things that's going on is I spent some time, as is often the case, doing what DBQ likes to call navel gazing, and I came up with kind of 6 basic, I don't know, philosophical or realized, I don't know, factors in what I'm currently doing gaming wise, but also from a content creation and streaming perspective. And there were some things that I was not satisfied with, not only with streaming, but also just, I mean, the cost of doing this podcast is that it kind of drives you to be a variety gamer. Now for me that was okay because I was a variety gamer in the first place, which is why I was interested in doing a gaming podcast and blogging and so on and so forth. Excuse me. But still, there's a hardwire in doing this show that then drives that to not being optional, and so in years past, we have managed to do things like spend a chunk of time with Destiny, even though we still had 23 other releases to play in the year, and that always creates a problem. So one of the things I've been going through is how can I contend with that? Because recently I've been, man, I'd really like to just spend like a big chunk of time with Destiny 2, or I'd like to really focus on flight sims, or I'd really like to dive deep on racing games or whatever. So one of the things that I'm doing between, my gaming and streaming, and my gaming means my gaming and the podcast gaming to a certain extent, is separating those two things. And so Fortnite is an enjoyable thing to play on stream because there are a lot of streamers who play Fortnite, and it's a collaborative and kind of a social experience. So one of the streamers that I've been collaborating with, Nordstradamus, on Twitch, plays Fortnite. He and I have been playing Borderlands most recently, but he had picked up and gotten into the new season. I've played Fortnite a couple of times, like literally a couple of times, but I decided. Most recently, prior to this, it had been on the Switch. So I decided that I wanted to go back and play it a little bit more. I decided I would do it on PC just because that was the system that I already had set up and had been gaming on. It was what I was playing Destiny 2 on at the time, and so I would play Destiny 2 earlier in the day and then play Fortnite at night. So I wound up setting this thing up mainly to just branch out my own gaming because Fortnite is the type of game that I just don't get time to play. I'd like to play multiplayer, but we spend so much time having to play single player stuff that I just don't get enough time to play multiplayer stuff. So, kind of a long explanation, but just framing out that I got into it because I'm trying to find space to put multiplayer time in my schedule that doesn't normally accommodate it.
So this is. I'm sorry for the pregnant pause there, right?
No,
Because I think I think that does give a good sense of it. It also sets it up that this is something that you're going to be coming back to. As you're speaking, I know that in the past few months I've felt a similar kind of push and pull, right? In terms of how do you balance kind of being the buffet line and just sampling a whole bunch of little things to be able to have that diversity of games to talk about and to put in perspective, but also how do we give ourselves time to kind of dive into something. So I'm glad to hear you talk about it because it is something that I've wrestled with as well, and Destiny often becomes that. But I think, in my case, the game that even after just a couple hours that I know that is going to be a game that, last year it was Assassin's Creed Odyssey that I gave myself kind of permission to deep dive into. This year I'm pretty sure it's going to be Outer Worlds. So playing a little bit about it. Started playing it just the other night. It's getting good reviews, right? But I'm also hearing the longer out there now, I'm starting to hear some things related to it kind of is what it is. And if you know that, it doesn't necessarily do anything new, but it does what it does well. And what it is it's a Fallout type of game. It felt like a warm blanket putting it back on, right? I mean, it was cozy. It came fresh out of the dryer. It was like, oh, I remember this, right? It brought me right back to wandering around the wasteland or New California. What is it? New Vegas.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword of Obsidian, right? We all I think probably all the co-hosts kind of have a soft spot in their heart for Obsidian. They're a studio that a lot of us grew up with through our. It's tough for me to say formative years. Second or third stage formative years of gaming. And they've done some great things. I mean, I know them. Like, I'm not a big Fallout fan. My love for them goes back before Fallout. But yeah, that's what I hear is that like you kind of know what you're getting with that game. That being said, for a lot of people, that's a really good thing, So.
And that's exactly how I feel at this point, right? I'm a couple hours in. What I am loving is I'm somebody who bounced off of Fallout 4. The base building aspects of it just wasn't, and the part it brought you back into this kind of drab world where the beauty of Outer Worlds is it's vibrant, it's colorful, it's also sometimes kind of derelict and run down, but it's visually interesting to engage with. There's not this kind of uncanny valley, dead-eye stare that the Bethesda Fallout game engine has, and the Skyrim engine, right, has kind of been known for. They still stare at you quite a bit, but it doesn't feel like, there's a multiple layers of polish. It feels like a current generation game. But even just being able to go back in and spec and start to move down some of those dialogue options, or the ability that, knowing that you can kill anybody in the game and the game will adjust for you, meant that there were a number of times, even in the opening first couple of missions, that I thought, well, should I just do it to see what will happen? Or, is that my second playthrough where I'm going to go back and be a real jerk through all of this, let's say. Right? And so it's been good characters to interact with. It's something I know I'm going to talk about in a few more weeks because I want to spend a little more time and see how it fleshes out. So other than Fortnite, you have you mentioned Borderlands. Is that Borderlands 3, or are you guys going back to the original Game of the Year edition?
Nostradamus and I went back to the original Game of the Year Enhanced edition on PC. Before we go to that, I guess I want to ask you, kind of in similar vein to my comment on Resident Evil 7, is Outer Worlds tracking as Game of the Year contender for you right now?
It's going to be in the superlative show for sure.
Okay. Right.
Yep. I mean, unless it takes a steep dive,
right.
But the way that it set itself up, the level of polish, the level of immersion that, I thought I was just going to dip into it, create a character, and call it a night.
Right.
because it was already like 11:30 when I started,
Right.
and it was 1:30 by the time I stopped.
Right.
So,
And
you
we
know,
and we only have Jedi Knight Fallen Order and Death Stranding, right? Really left this year as far as big releases go.
as far as big releases, yeah, I think so. Right? I mean, Modern Warfare is out now. We
Right.
really have, unless Prime is tracking Pokemon to be part of his Game of the Year discussion. You get a couple more Switch releases, but even there's not really a December release this year. Like sometimes we get an Ubisoft December release, and
Right.
this year we're not getting that.
Yep.
So yeah, we're starting the home stretch, starting to think about what we need to do in terms of cleanup on our playlist as well.
Yep. Uh, yeah, we can swing back
If
around
you
and
want
make.
to talk about Borderlands, we can. I wasn't sure if it was 3 or the original.
No,
It's just a good plug for your channel as well. So
yeah, it's the original, and I don't have to spend a ton of time on getting into a ton of detail on it. Again, it's a great collaborative game, right, for two people to play. Our intention is I guess. Although again we're distracted by Fortnite now, so this whole plan may fall by the wayside. Originally, I think our plan was just to spend over the next weeks, months, or whatever, just to trudge through the entire Borderlands campaign, 1, 2, and 3 as a set piece. And we are not necessarily cutting a linear path through it, so we're not trying to do, only the story-based mission. I mean, we've done a healthy amount of side missions as well. We're not, again, not necessarily. We're also not necessarily going for 100% completion. We just want to play the game however we want to play it. Yeah, we're probably maybe a third through Borderlands right now, and still haven't touched any. As far as I can tell, I don't think we've touched any of the DLC of the expansion content, because we backed away from any portals that were taking us like to other islands and things like that early in the game. And since then, I don't think we've really seen them. So yeah, we're having a good time.
no, I don't know that you would unless you took some of those spots, right? I mean, because I'm trying to think of what there's a Moxie Superdome one, which is kind of just an arena.
Right.
There's the Halloween. There's the Zombie Island of Dr. Zed.
Right. So there's definitely some that when you go to a portal, like it prominently displays like that you're going to something that is named like radically different than the other general areas on the game that immediately allow you to recognize that that's a DLC location. So we avoided those when we ran into those in the early game, but now that we've tracked much further along into the story and have gotten like our first piece of the vault key and whatnot, we tend not to see those. But yeah, we're having a good time. We joke around about it when I do the game announces or the go live announces on Twitter, and we call ourselves the Son of Anarchy, and it's a lot of it is about just going in like creating mayhem, and that's what Borderlands is. It's just like very orchestrated mayhem, constant like every 5 minutes. So
That is
it's always good for a laugh.
Yeah, very much so. So I will take that orchestrated mayhem and give you two other games that require you to create some and also require you to clean some up. So Felix the Reaper, I played a little bit. This came out last week. Felix Reaper is a puzzle game from Kong Orange Studios, kind of an indie studio. It's on Game Pass. It's also it's on Switch as well. I think it would be a really good tablet game. It's got a great sense of style, a good soundtrack. There's this kind of funky soundtrack to it because you're a Death Reaper, Reaper of Death, and you're trying to set up scenarios so that a certain thing is killed through the kind of Rube Goldberg-esque contraption or series of events that's happening on each board, and so you end up moving things around to be able to line them up in such a way that they can be killed as Death has commanded you. But you cannot be, because you are a Reaper, you cannot be in the sunlight. So you do a lot of shifting day to night, or making sure that you're tilting the world, setting the sun, rising the sun, bringing it back up so you can grab a shadow in different spots to be able to move around basically a grid. It is, I don't know. I played the first handful of levels, and it pretty much is It doesn't seem, reading other reviews of it, that's kind of what it is. I think it's a good puzzle game. It's got a great sense of style, but it's not necessarily a whole lot deeper than what you see. So again, good Game Pass game. Could be fun on a mobile device. Concrete Genie on PlayStation is another game that I played some over the last 2 weeks. This game it's by Pixel Studios, Pixel Studios. They did Intertwined, so that was kind of the arty kind of flying creatures, a blue and a gold, and it was you were kind of balancing. It was more of a visual synthesizer than it was a game sometimes. Concrete Genie it's a beautiful game. It's a $30 game. It's probably priced about right. I think if it hit that $20 price point over the holidays, I would encourage anybody to pick it up that has kids. It is, you end up if you can get through the tutorial that has you use some motion control with your PlayStation controller, you'll be fine. But you're set in kind of this rundown harbor town, full of graffiti and this kind of creeping darkness. And the darkness also works as kind of kind of a metaphor for kind of the loss of a town's prime, right? Industry moved out. It was a fishing village. It's no longer that. It's been run down in parts of abandoned warehouses. So there's this kind of undertones there, and you have the art style and the character animations. The mouths and the eyes move almost like a stop motion. So there's kind of some very distinct movements there. And then you get some flashback scenes that feel this kind of simplistic, kind of almost like golden book type of style, kind of flashbacks, 50s type of blocks and primary color aspects. So there's this bright kind of happy flashback pieces with kind of this drab world that you are going around in. So again, it's got a great atmosphere like Resident Evil 7. Unfortunately, the part I ran into is trying to figure out the game's logic. That there's a number of puzzles. You're painting things. You're drawing some monsters. They're coming to life to be able to. A red monster burn certain things to be able to open up areas, and a blue monster is wind, and a yellow monster is electrical. And it does a pretty good job of introducing you to it all, and then it kind of throws you into a bigger world and hopes that you remembered all of that, or gives you some guidebooks to go back and kind of menu dive if you didn't. It was. I hit a point where I had to set it down for a night, come back to it, because I felt like, okay, I'm fighting the game's logic, and how fun is that versus when it allowed me to kind of explore a little bit and kind of avoid the bullies in town and do a little bit of stealth and paint some things and had some good kind of 3D movement. It was very enjoyable. When I feel like I'm fighting, well, this is the same way I feel about kind of classic adventure games as well, right? When I'm fighting to understand the designer's puzzle logic, it starts to be frustrating. Fortunately, there is a hint system that gets built into this so that you don't have to kind of struggle against that too long. So there's some, which again I think is why it makes it very accessible to kind of an all ages, and I think it could be something where a younger audience. It's not super complicated. The platforms are, there's a little bit of Epic Mickey in there, even in terms of using a paintbrush to clean up areas and to bring things to life, and so it had some of that feel to it as well. Really enjoyed it. I think it's one that I'm sure will go on sale here around the holidays, and it's a worthwhile pickup. Concrete Genie. So I've got a few games left, but I want to get back to Destiny 2. Both you and I have had a chance to continue to play around with that. I've been playing more into Shadowkeep and moving my level up into the 900s, but you have gone back and are still kind of making your way through previous seasonal content, correct? So where are you at, and how's it going for you?
Yeah, well, that paradigm's a little broken. So I guess what I've committed to now is I do want to kind of see the Forsaken campaign because I hadn't already played that. I've already played Osiris and Warmind. I was intending to take all of my characters through that and revisit those. That is a really hard thing to do on Destiny 2 on Steam, like tracking down who has what missions and where. When sometimes the paradigm isn't the same as it was to like get back to Forsaken. It appears to me that at least with Forsaken, when I picked it up, I picked it up at the beginning, so the migration didn't really effectively capture where I was in that campaign. And I don't know if that's a typical thing across all of the DLC packs or not. Um,
In terms of catching where you were, how do you mean?
So I mean, like I had already done some things to progress, the initial whatever. I had already tracked
Sure.
down some bounties and stuff, and it seems like it kind of reset the board.
Yeah, because you were kind of moving through, earning your rep with Spider and being able to do some of those things. Yeah, I think that new light really reset the board for all of those. So if you had some Osiris missions done or mine, you kind of start fresh again with all of
Right.
them. They're no longer on your map. You've got to go back and find. And they're kind of hidden too, right? I mean, I think that we had this conversation
Right.
of how do you track that down. It really throws everybody and funnels everybody into kind of the hub. I mean, it because it's gone free to play on all platforms. It does this on PlayStation and on Xbox as well. Is that
Right.
all of those quest givers are all in the same spot now? I mean, they're hidden away, and it's. I think it's intentionally designed to bring you to those hub worlds, to be able to populate some of those patrol zones more than chase a campaign.
Right. So as a result of that, tonight I started playing with my Titan, and I just resolved. Look, I'm just I'm gonna do what apparently it is that Bungie wants you to do, and I'm just gonna pick what I'm gonna play from the table of quests that you have in the tab that's second from the left in the director screen. And I'm just not going to worry about So right now my objective is to go through enough of those until I hit light level 780, and at which point I guess I can go ahead and proceed on the Shadowkeep campaign. So yeah, I've given up the notion of going back and completing any or rerunning through any campaign oriented stuff, unless I just happen to stumble across an opportunity to replay those or direction to play them.
So, but your character's all bumped up. Everybody bumped up to 750, right? So now
Yeah,
you're just
yeah. So there was no option for that, which I was a little, there are some things that in the past, if this hadn't been a whole migration to a different service platform, I'd have been more aggravated in their choices that they made. But yeah, that's one of the things is that when your character comes over there, everybody comes over as a 750.
yeah.
All of your weapons are reset to 750. Yeah,
And you quickly gain more, right? I mean,
yeah,
I think I started the Shadowkeep campaign at like 755, right? I mean, I didn't even spend a whole lot of time doing a whole lot of other stuff. Uh, and you get enough drops. They're really frequent with the drops. As that ramp to 900 happens relatively quickly. You can get through probably the first 4, 5 areas in the Shadowkeep campaign and make your way mostly there. I have not finished the campaign. My character is at 920 something. I think the challenge at this point is that once you hit, and this is where I was just thinking about this today actually, that my incentive to go back gets less the further I'm away from Destiny. So I had company at my house. I didn't play Destiny all weekend long. My incentive to go back is pretty. It has decreased significantly from the first, from that grind of trying to chase the number climb. And it is, I had that climb to 900 super satisfying. That there is, I have always enjoyed the level climb and progression in Destiny when you're gaining levels, when you're getting gear that this is that does continue to increase you. It's when you hit that kind of soft cap, and now in order to get a gear that gives me something that will increase, I've got to run 3 different strikes, or I've got to do the Vex offensive 4 times, right? I mean, so that it starts to really slow that down in terms of, okay, so is doing the same thing over and over again really worth the 2 points in light that I'm going to get, or am I better off going into Outer Worlds and just losing myself in that? I think the one thing that this season has done well, that has kept me, or at least continued to give me some of that incentive to come back, is the season pass aspect. So the kind of the battle pass aspect of you still level up. There's still I can still see that number go up and gain something, even if my light number is not drastically increasing. So the benefit is that no matter what you're doing, you're still gaining some levels along the way. So I also had a chance to play Indivisible. So this is by the Skullgirls studio. So this was a Kickstarter game. It's action RPG-ish. It kind of plays around. There's been lots of talk that it plays around with some of the battle mechanics from Valkyrie Profile, a PlayStation 1 era game. It's got a beautiful art style, right? I mean, it looks like a cartoon. It's got a great kind of, Skullgirls had a really good sense of animation, a good distinguishing ability between characters. The action RPG aspects of this means that you've got, you end up with a whole host of different characters, and you can have 4 at a time active, and each one is set to one of your buttons, circle, square, X, Y, Z, X, A, B, X, Y, whatever you're playing on, and then you can do a combo with that one character, or you can chain different characters together, and so they can create complementary chains in terms of a status effect, and then a damage, or there's different ways that you can set up different combos, and there's some light platforming in between. Platforming isn't anything that's gonna, it's not Super Mario. It's not, it's really not even Ukulele and the Impossible Layer. It's not gonna win you over on the platforming aspects. It is the kind of customization of the combat, because you end up with so many, or at least you have the potential of so many characters. When I played it last week, I only got probably 6 characters in it so far. So again, fun. It's one of those where it's slated to come to the Switch later on. It's produced by 505 Games. They're doing the Switch port, so they also did the one for Bloodstain, and so I think there's some of this where they're holding back the port to make sure that it doesn't launch in as broken of a state as Bloodstain did this summer on Switch. I definitely want to come back to it. I don't know that I want to sit in front of a TV and play it. That it may be more of something where having it in a portable mode allows you to kind of continue to grind while you're watching some other stuff. So again, I seem to be choosing, just like I did with Dragon Quest, choosing the Switch over or portable systems over the console if I'm going to be playing some RPGs where I'm going to be grinding. So, and that actually is my other game that I spent some more time with was Yaga. So Yaga is an action RPG on iOS. It's on Apple Arcade. It is coming out to PlayStation and PC next month in November here. It's also coming to Switch, but it launched first on Apple Arcade. It's kind of it's got kind of a Fable storybook type aspect in terms of the art style, and it is a side scroller type of action RPG. You're set in kind of a fairy tale world. You're a one-armed blacksmith, and you're heading out to win something back for the king, whatever MacGuffin it is, and you've got a series of witches who are telling you this tale, and there's some narrative pieces. There's a lot of rhyming in the narrative. When you respawn, you get some options, and it all fills in this kind of storybook aspect. So it's got a creative wrapper to it. The gameplay has gotten better. I'm a couple hours in now. As I've been able to do some upgrades, it feels a little more fluid. Really, it feels more fluid when I've played with a controller versus the touchscreen. It's got a locked-in location for the virtual analog stick, which makes it somewhat limiting. Playing with a controller makes it feels great. It feels really good with a controller. It seems like it's gonna, it's got a price point of $20. So yeah, that's actually where I've found myself defaulting to in terms of playing some portable game there. So let's move from portable games to something that may be very much connected to stationary. So your Dirt Rally 2.0, are you playing with a wheel and pedal?
I am not. So
Okay.
one of the things I've done, this theme of trying to get better organized about stuff is I have a bunch of gaming peripherals. I typically tend to use them at each of the different PCs, and that creates a problem. So in moving stuff back into the studio, one of the things I said was, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take any gaming peripheral that I have, and I'm going to essentially lock it to a PC. And also when I like switch them around, based on what games I'm playing, the other problem I have is I'll wind up like here, if I'm playing at this workstation, I play Destiny 2 with one of these peripherals, and my configs are set up one way. The next time I play Destiny 2, I play it with a different set of peripherals, and I got to redo my configs all over again. So now things like these mini, man, it's been a long time since I've had like a physical prop but something like this mini mechanical gaming keyboard, which is what I play all my shooters with. Now I have this always at this workstation. Whenever I play a first-person shooter, I use this thing. So no, I'm using my Xbox One S controllers. I think, yeah, this one I was using playing with the 1537 model, so the original Xbox controller that launched with the system. Works fine. Very very grueling to try and pull off playing Dirt Rally 2.0 with a controller because it is a physics model heavy game. Fortunately, I think the second or third night that I was playing, a viewer came through who, just like I said, these things were like, man, wouldn't it be nice if, I focus on like one type of game. He's a guy who he plays nothing, but pretty much plays rally racing games. And so was able to offer some tips and pointers and whatnot. But still an incredibly wonderful and rewarding experience. Because you can go from being like the worst in the league to steadily moving your way up the ladder and getting better and better cars and etc. And it's a great physics model. The fact that I was playing with a controller and I got just as much enjoyment out of it as I would have with wheel and pedals. Pretty impressive, and just a great graphics and physics engine too. So there's a lot of controversy over this one. And this is a 2019 release. It's one of the things you'll hear me giving Codemasters tons of kudos because they pulled off releasing this and F1 2019. So two major installments in two of their franchises. Codemasters is not a huge studio. Two major installments in two of their really big tentpole franchises in the same year, and actually within months of each other. Dirt Rally 2.0, I think, released in March, I think, and F1 2019 released in May. And both of them are great. Like, normally when a studio does something like that, like, one of them would be like a derp, but both of these are great. Dirt Rally 2.0 is a great game. A little controversy because people are bothered because they took stages and maps and tracks, and put them behind a paywall of, a season pass or whatever. And so some of the community is like outraged and all up in arms about it. But I'm like, I mean, you should.
It is a business model at this point.
Yeah. At this point, if it's a big AAA game, expect that it's going to have a season pass, and that's just going to be a thing that you're going to have to contend with. And you can either buy it or you can not buy it.
Yep. Yeah. Right. As the world that we live in. So anything else on your playlist that you want to give a shout out to or highlight, or things coming up in your rotation for streaming that you want to give a notice of?
No. Like I said, this some of these new paradigms that are built off of these 6 nits that I want to pick at. Playing Fortnite on stream while playing Destiny 2 off stream is kind of the first rotation of that. So I don't know for certain where it's going to go from here. I'm hoping it gives me room to do things like get back to like World of Warships, maybe get back to Dreadnought if that game hasn't been shut down. But also to dig deep on some of the games that we kind of cracked open as part of this job, if you will, Fire Emblem Three Kingdoms,
Mm-hmm.
or Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Total War Three
War
Kingdoms
Three Kingdoms. There
are
you go. Don't get
are
them confused.
right are both new releases that I played earlier this year, but I want to get back and play them some more in, as you mentioned, in more detail.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some of those that are. Even as I'm looking forward to playing Outer Worlds, I know I still want to get back and do a little bit with Control, and go back to a game that is I continue to get mixed up, or at least it's easy to get mixed up in terms of the title, which is Outer Wilds as well. So that was a June release. Anyhow, we are coming into that holiday game season, right? We are making our way through the big tentpole AAA releases, along with a bunch of other little stuff, as we've been talking about tonight, from a variety of genres. And because we are one big gaming family as we come into this holiday season, we want to take our next gaming assignment here and play something together as a group. So the 4 or 5 co-hosts will get as many of us together as we can and organize a game night or two to be able to do something maybe either competitive or cooperative. I think we've got a variety of systems that we can hit up on. We may end up only having the Switch as our one kind of common denominator between us all, depending on where PC gaming plays out. But we've got some options there. So I guess because you pitched this as the assignment for us, did I do it justice to have a folksy, feel good reason for all of us to gather around the gaming campfire and play a little bit together?
Nothing other than it's been since last holiday season that I think we did that when you Prime and I
We
think
played some
Halo
Diablo.
5. Yes, Diablo 2, right? That
Yeah.
or Diablo as well. It was Diablo 3 actually, not Diablo 2, but that and last holidays I think we played when we were trying out the first rollout of co-streaming on Mixer. We played some
Yes.
Halo
Yep.
5 together, so that was pretty awesome. But it's been such a long time since we did that because this year we've all been pointed in multiple different directions. So I just thought with hopefully some approaching downtime over the holiday break, it would be a good time to get back together and play something together.
Yeah. So, well, this will bring us before the holiday break because we've got 2 weeks here until we meet again for our playlist. So that will be the week of the 11th of November. We'll come back. So by that time, we'll get most of our releases out. We'll get a little bit to play before we get to, I believe, the 18th and some Star Wars action. And we'll see what else tips our triggers along the way. So that is our show for tonight in terms of our game experience show. Next week we'll be back to wrap up the week news and talk about kind of what that means for us as gamers and as consumers. So I hope you have had a chance to enjoy it. If you feel contrary to some of the things that we've been talking about, if you've got other feedback on those games, if you've got different opinions, join us. Leave a message. Hit us up on Twitter. Go ahead and leave a message down in the YouTube video as well, or find us and many other places on the 2KG network as well. So for myself, DBqHams and Agasicles Stamas, this has been enough to keep going for the week of October 28th. Until next time, have a good evening, have good gaming, and have good friends. Good night.